I came home earlier than expected after an emergency surgery. No one came to pick me up. As I was about to enter the house, a homeless little girl ran up to me and screamed, "Ma'am, please don't go into that house. Your daughter-in-law." A chill went down my spine. But when the police arrived, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My hands were still shaking from the emergency surgery when I stepped out of the taxi. 64 years old, and I still felt every muscle ache after standing in that operating room for 7 hours straight. Mrs. Henderson's appendix had ruptured, and there wasn't time to wait for the younger surgeons. Lives don't pause for convenience. The cab pulled away, leaving me standing alone on my own street at 9:30 in the evening. I'd expected my son Marcus or my daughter-in-law to pick me up, but when I called, Ara said they were both too tired. You understand, don't you? Bessie Marcus worked late again, and I had such a headache today. Of course I understood. I always understood. My house looked different in the darkness. The porch light was off, which was strange. I always left it on and knew that. The living room windows glowed softly, and I could make out shadows moving inside. At least someone was home. I fumbled for my keys in my purse, my fingers still stiff from the surgical gloves. That's when I heard the small voice. "Lady, lady. Wait." I turned to see a little girl running toward me from the abandoned lot next to my house. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, wearing clothes that had seen better days and shoes that were too big for her feet. Her dark hair was tangled and her face was streaked with dirt. "Please," she gasped, grabbing my coat sleeve with tiny hands. "Don't go in there." "Not yet." I blinked, certain the exhaustion was making me see things. "Sweetie, what are you doing out here so late? Where are your parents?" "The lady inside," she whispered, glancing fearfully at my house. "The pretty lady with the yellow hair. She's doing bad things to your stuff." I saw her through the window. A chill ran down my spine. Ada had blonde hair. What kind of bad things? She was putting your things in boxes, the sparkly things from your bedroom, and she was laughing with a man on the phone, she said. The child's voice dropped even lower. She said, "You wouldn't need them anymore." My heart started pounding. "What's your name, Honey Riley?" She tugged my coat again. My grandma used to live in that house before. The blue one with the broken fence. She told me about the pretty lady before she had to go to the place for old people. Before I could ask more questions, Riley suddenly stiffened. "Someone's coming," she whispered, then darted back toward the empty lot, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. A homeless child warning me about my own daughter-in-law. It sounded absurd, but something cold and heavy had settled in my stomach. I walked up my front steps, each one creaking under my feet. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet night. When I reached for the door handle, I noticed scratches around the keyhole that hadn't been there before. "Bessie, is that you?" Ara's voice came from inside, sweet and concerned. "We were so worried when you didn't call." I opened the door and stepped into my own home. Ara appeared in the hallway, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. She wore one of her expensive dresses, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Marcus wasn't anywhere to be seen. "How did the surgery go?" she asked, moving closer. Her smile was perfect, but something in her eyes made me uncomfortable. "You look exhausted, poor thing. Where's Marcus?" "He fell asleep early. You know how hard he's been working." She placed a hand on my arm, guiding me toward the living room. "Come sit down. I'll make you some tea." As we walked through my house, I noticed things seemed different. Subtle changes that I couldn't quite place. The family photos on the hallway table were rearranged. The small crystal vase my mother had given me was missing from the side table. "Ara, where's the crystal vase? The one that was right here." She paused, tilting her head with a confused expression. "What vase?" "Bessie, I don't remember seeing a vase there. It was my mother's. It's been there for years." "Oh, sweetie." Her voice took on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. You've had such a long day. Maybe you're thinking of a different spot. You know how these things can get mixed up when we're tired. That cold feeling in my stomach grew stronger. I knew exactly where that vase had been. I'd dusted it every week for the past 15 years. I think I'll skip the tea, I said, heading toward the stairs. I need to rest. Of course. All's voice followed me. Sweet dreams, Bessie. In my bedroom, I noticed more changes. My jewelry box was slightly askew on the dresser. The small silver frame containing my wedding photo was turned face down. And there on my nightstand was a bottle of pills I'd never seen before. I picked up the bottle, squinting at the label in the dim light. Sleep aids prescribed to me according to the label, but I'd never asked for sleeping pills. I'd never even seen this doctor's name before. My hands started trembling again, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion. I thought about Riley's words about strange behavior, about all the little things that had seemed off lately, but that I dismissed. I walked to my bedroom window and looked down at the empty lot. A small figure sat huddled under the old oak tree. Riley was still there keeping watch. That's when I heard voices from downstairs. Ara was talking to someone, her voice low but animated. I crept to my bedroom door and opened it just a crack. Went perfectly, she was saying. She's already doubting herself. A few more weeks of the medication in her morning coffee and we can move forward with the plan. My blood turned to ice. I pressed my ear closer to the crack. The lawyer said once she's declared incompetent, Marcus will have full power of attorney. Allah continued. And since I'm his wife, I'll be managing everything. The house alone is worth $800,000, and that's not counting her other assets. There was a pause then. Laughter, cold, calculating laughter from the woman I'd welcomed into my family 3 years ago. Don't worry, Ara said. She won't be a problem much longer. These old doctors think they know everything, but they're so easy to manipulate, especially when you convince them their patient is showing signs of dementia. I backed away from this door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it downstairs. Everything suddenly made sense. The missing items, the strange pills, the way had been encouraging Marcus to worry about my forgetfulness lately. I thought about all the times had offered to make my morning coffee. All the times she'd suggested I might be getting confused about things. All the times she'd spoken to Marcus privately about my declining health. Riley had tried to warn me. A child living on the streets had seen what I'd been too trusting to notice. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the bottle of pills in my hand. Tomorrow I would have to be very careful. I would have to pretend everything was normal while I figured out exactly how deep this betrayal went. But tonight, I finally knew the truth. My daughter-in-law wasn't just stealing my belongings. She was stealing my life. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard's voice again talking about making me incompetent, about the $800,000 my house was worth. By morning, I felt like I'd aged another decade. The smell of coffee drifted up from the kitchen, along with Alara's cheerful humming. She was making breakfast just like she had every morning for the past 6 months. How many times had she drugged my coffee during those mornings? How many times had I thanked her for being so thoughtful? I got dressed slowly, trying to organize my thoughts. In the harsh light of day, part of me wondered if I'd imagined the whole conversation. But then I looked at the bottle of pills on my nightstand, the ones I'd never requested, and I knew it had been real. Downstairs, Marcus was already at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone while bustled around the stove. My son looked tired, older than his 38 years. When had those lines appeared around his eyes, morning mom? He barely looked up from his phone. How was the surgery yesterday? Successful, I said, watching as poured coffee into my favorite mug. The same mug she'd been using to drug me. Mrs. Henderson should make a full recovery. That's wonderful, Ara said, setting the mug in front of me with a bright smile. I made it just how you like it. I stared at the coffee steam rising from its surface. How you like it with sleeping medication mixed in? Actually, I think I'll just have water this morning, I said. My stomach's a bit unsettled. All's smile faltered for just a second. Oh, but I made it specially for you. Are you sure you're feeling all right? You seemed confused last night asking about some vase that wasn't there. Marcus finally looked up. What vase? Nothing important, I said quickly, but was already shaking her head with exaggerated concern. She was looking for a crystal vase that she insisted had been in the living room. I tried to tell her gently that there wasn't any vase, but she seemed so certain. Allah's voice carried that perfect note of worried sympathy. I'm just concerned about these little episodes, Marcus. Episodes? Marcus frowned at me. Mom, are you having memory problems? No, I'm not having memory problems. The words came out sharper than I intended. I know exactly where that vase was, and I know it's missing. Mother and son exchanged a glance. It was subtle, but I caught it. The kind of look that said they'd discussed this before. Maybe we should make an appointment with Dr. Peterson, Marcus suggested gently. Just to be safe. I don't need to see Dr. Peterson. I stood up, leaving the coffee untouched. I need to get to the hospital. As I gathered my things, my mind started racing backward, piecing together months of small incidents I'd dismissed. The Time had rearranged my prescription bottles, claiming she was organizing them for me. The day I couldn't find my spare car keys and she'd suggested I was misplacing things more often. The afternoon she'd thrown away what she called old junk mail that I'd been certain included important documents. At the hospital, I threw myself into work, but my concentration kept drifting. Between patients, I found myself thinking about other changes I'd noticed but ignored. 3 months ago, my neighbor Mrs. Chen had stopped coming over for our weekly tea. When I'd asked about it, she'd said Mrs. Chen had mentioned being too busy to visit, but that hadn't sounded like Mrs. Chen at all. 2 months ago, my book club had apparently decided to meet at the library instead of rotating between our homes. Ara had delivered this news with such certainty that I'd never questioned it. Now I wondered if my book club even knew I was missing. Last month, my longtime housekeeper Rosa had suddenly quit. Ara had been the one to tell me, explaining that Rosa had found a better-paying job and hadn't wanted to discuss it with me directly. At the time, I'd been hurt that Rosa hadn't said goodbye after 10 years of working together. How many of these changes had actually happened? How many had been manufactured by Ara to isolate me? That afternoon, I drove past Rosa's house. Her car was in the driveway and she was tending her garden. I pulled over and called out to her. Rosa, it's so good to see you. She looked up, her face breaking into a genuine smile. Dr. Bessie, I was just thinking about you yesterday. She walked over to the fence. How have you been? I missed seeing you. I missed you too. Ara told me you found another job. Rosa's expression shifted to confusion. Another job? I asked your daughter-in-law if I could come back 3 weeks ago. She said you didn't need housekeeping services anymore because you were. She hesitated. Because I was what? She said you were having trouble with strangers in the house, that it made you anxious to have people you didn't know well around your things. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Rosa. I never said that. I've been wondering why you stopped coming. She told me you were embarrassed to tell me yourself. Rosa's face was full of concern now. Dr. Bessie, are you okay? You look pale. I managed to reassure Rosa that I was fine and promised to call her soon. But as I drove home, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The web of lies was so much bigger than I'd realized. When I got home, I found Marcus and in the living room, their heads close together in conversation. They separated quickly when I walked in, but not before I caught the tension in their postures. Mom, we need to talk. Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. I sat down in my armchair, the one I'd had since before Marcus was born. About what we're worried about you, arching on the edge of the sofa. The confusion about the Voss forgetting to call us after your surgery. And Marcus told me you've been asking Rosa to come back even though you told her you didn't want housekeeping anymore. I never told Rosa anything like that. Mom, Marcus leaned forward. Ara showed me the conversation. You were very clear that having Rosa around was making you uncomfortable. What conversation? When did I supposedly have this conversation? Last month when you asked me to call her for you because you didn't want to hurt her feelings. Ara's voice was patient, as if she were talking to a child. "Don't you remember?" I stared at her, this woman who had invaded my home and my family. She was so convincing, so genuinely concerned sounding that, for a moment, I doubted myself. Had I forgotten a conversation? Was my memory really failing? But then I remembered the pills on my nightstand, the conversation I'd overheard last night, the coffee I'd refused to drink this morning. "I think I'll go upstairs and rest," I said, standing up carefully. "That's a good idea," said. "I'll bring you some tea later." As I climbed the stairs, I heard Marcus's voice, low and worried. "Do you really think we should call Dr. Peterson?" "I think we have to reply for her own safety." In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my jewelry box with trembling fingers. My grandmother's pearl necklace was gone. The diamond earrings Marcus's father had given me for our 20th anniversary were missing. In their place were cheap costume jewelry pieces I'd never seen before. I opened my dresser drawer where I kept important papers. The folder containing my will was still there, but it felt lighter. I pulled it out and flipped through the pages. My original will leaving everything to Marcus was there, but stapled to it was a newer document I didn't recognize. A power of attorney form already signed, apparently by me, giving Marcus full control over my financial and medical decisions in case of mental incapacitation. The signature looked like mine, but I had no memory of signing it. I sank into the chair by my window, the document trembling in my hands. Below, in the empty lot, I could see a small figure moving among the weeds. Riley was still there, still watching. Tomorrow, I would find a way to talk to her. She might be the only person who could tell me what had really been happening in my own home. I woke up the next morning with a plan. I'd spent most of the night thinking about how to approach Riley without alarming Marcus or Ara. The child had risked herself to warn me, and I owed it to both of us to find out what she knew. I made a show of drinking orange juice instead of coffee at breakfast, claiming my stomach was still bothering me. All's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she quickly covered it with a concerned smile. "Maybe you should see Dr. Peterson about your stomach too," she suggested. "It could be related to the other issues we discussed." "What other issues?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she meant. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mom, we talked about this yesterday. The memory problems, the confusion about Rosa, the missing vase that wasn't there." The vase was there. I kept my voice level but firm. It was my mother's crystal vase, and it sat on that table for 15 years. Allah and Marcus exchanged another one of their looks. I was getting tired of being treated like a confused old woman in my own home. "I need to run some errands today," I announced, standing up from the table. "What kind of errands?" All asked quickly. "Maybe I should come with you just to make sure you're okay driving." The suggestion made my skin crawl. 3 months ago, I would have appreciated her concern. Now I knew it was about control. "I'm perfectly capable of driving myself to the grocery store," I said. "I've been doing it for 46 years. I left them sitting at the table, probably planning their next move in this elaborate game they were playing with my life. At the grocery store, I bought food. I didn't need killing time until I was sure Marcus had left for work. Then I drove home and parked around the corner from my house where I could see the empty lot but couldn't see me. It took 20 minutes, but eventually, I spotted Riley emerging from behind the old oak tree. She was carrying a small backpack and what looked like a bottle of water. My heart ached seeing this child living rough when she should have been in school in a warm home. I got out of my car and approached the edge of the lot carefully. "Riley, it's me, the lady from last night." She turned her dark eyes, wary but not unfriendly. "You came back. I need to ask you some questions about what you've seen. About the pretty lady with yellow hair." Riley glanced toward my house, then back at me. "She's not there now. She left in her fancy car about an hour ago. Can you tell me what you've seen her doing?" The child sat down on an overturned crate, and I lowered myself onto a fallen log nearby. Riley was quiet for a long moment, picking at the frayed edge of her jacket. "She brings men to your house sometimes when you're not there." She finally said, "Men with trucks who take your stuff away." My blood went cold. What kind of stuff? Pretty things, silver things that sparkle, and boxes of other stuff from inside. She always gives them money after they load the truck. I thought about my missing jewelry, the empty spaces I'd noticed throughout my house. How long has this been going on? Since before the cold weather started. Riley looked up at me with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. She hurt my grandma, too. Your grandma? Oh, she used to live in the blue house. Grandma Ruth. The pretty lady was nice to her at first, brought her cookies and helped with shopping. But then Grandma started forgetting things, and the pretty lady said Grandma wasn't safe living alone anymore. A chill ran down my spine. What happened to your grandma? They took her to the place for old people. But before that, all her nice things disappeared. The pretty lady said Grandma gave them to her, but Grandma never would have given away her wedding ring. She wore it every day for 60 years. Riley reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, tarnished silver frame. I found this in the trash after they took Grandma away. The pretty lady threw it out, but it's the only picture I have of Grandma and Grandpa together. I looked at the photograph of an elderly couple standing in front of the blue house, their arms around each other, smiling at the camera. The resemblance between the woman and Riley was unmistakable. Where are your parents, honey? Mommy got sick and went to heaven when I was 6. Daddy tried to take care of me, but he got sick too. Different kind of sick that made him forget how to be a daddy. Grandma took me in, but then she shrugged, trying to look brave. So you've been living out here since they took your grandmother away. I hide during the day so the school people don't find me. At night I watch the houses to make sure I'm safe. That's when I saw what the pretty lady was doing to your stuff. I felt a surge of protective anger both for this brave child and for Riley's grandmother, who had clearly been victimized the same way I was being targeted now. Riley, I need you to tell me everything you remember about what happened to your grandma. Every detail. For the next hour, Riley told me a story that was horrifyingly familiar. Ada had befriended Ruth, gradually isolating her from neighbors and friends. She'd convinced Ruth that she was becoming forgetful, that it wasn't safe for her to live alone. She'd arranged for Ruth to see a doctor who declared her incompetent, and then she'd overseen Ruth's placement in a nursing facility 40 meters away. The pretty lady cleaned out Grandma's house real fast after that, Riley said. Sold everything, even told people that Grandma wanted her to have the money to handle the arrangements. Did anyone question this? Any other family members Grandma's sister tried to visit, but the pretty lady said Grandma was too confused to see visitors, that it would upset her. Aunt Mary believed her because the pretty lady seemed so nice, so helpful. I closed my eyes, seeing my own future laid out in Riley's words. This was pattern. This was what she had planned for me. Riley, would you recognize any of the men who took things from your grandmother's house or from mine? She nodded. One of them has a red truck with writing on the side. Something about antiques. And there's a man with gray hair who comes sometimes at night. He doesn't take big things, just small, valuable ones. I made mental notes of everything Riley told me. But part of my mind was racing ahead to what I needed to do next. I couldn't go to the police without proof, and I couldn't trust Marcus to believe me when I'd already convinced him I was losing my mental faculties. I need to go back to the house now, I told Riley. But I want you to promise me something. If you see the pretty lady doing anything suspicious, or if you see those men with trucks again, I want you to call me. I wrote my cell phone number on a piece of paper and gave it to her along with a $20 bill. Get yourself some decent food and find a safe place to sleep tonight. Can you do that? Riley nodded solemnly, tucking both the paper and the money into her backpack. When I got back to my house, car was in the driveway. I sat in my own driveway for a moment, steeling myself for what was coming. Now that I knew the truth about what she was doing, every interaction with her would be an act. I found her in the kitchen preparing what looked like lunch. "How are your errands?" she asked without turning around. "Fine." I kept my voice neutral, but I was studying her with new eyes. How had I ever thought her concern was genuine? How had I missed the calculated coldness beneath her perfect smile? "I made your favorite soup," she said, ladling something creamy into a bowl. "You've seemed so tired lately. I thought something comforting might help." I looked at the soup, wondering what she might have added to it. Actually, I had a late breakfast. I'm not very hungry. But you need to eat, she insisted, setting the bowl in front of me. You've been so thin lately, and with all the stress of your memory issues, Ara. I sat down at the table and looked directly at her. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Something flickered in her eyes, but her smile never wavered. Of course. Have you noticed anyone unusual around the house lately? Any strangers? Any cars that don't belong in the neighborhood? No. Why are you worried about something? Her answer came too quickly, too smoothly. Someone who genuinely cared would have asked more questions, shown more concern. I just thought I saw an unfamiliar truck parked outside yesterday. I lied, watching her reaction carefully. Oh, that was probably the antique appraiser I called, she said casually. I thought you might want to get some of your older pieces evaluated for insurance purposes, in case anything ever happened to them. The lie rolled off her tongue so easily that I almost believed it myself. An antique appraiser. Of course, that's what she would call the man who was helping her fence my belongings. That was thoughtful of you, I managed to say. Did he find anything valuable? A few pieces that might be worth more than you think. I can show you his report later. I nodded and smiled, playing along with her charade while my stomach churned with revulsion. She was so confident, so sure that I was too senile to see through her lies. That evening after Marcus came home and we'd eaten dinner together like a normal family, I excused myself early. In my bedroom, I opened my jewelry box again and took inventory of what was missing. The pearl necklace, the diamond earrings, my mother's ruby ring, and at least 6 other valuable pieces. I estimated the value at around $15,000 just from the jewelry alone. Added to whatever furniture and other items she'd already sold, Ara had probably stolen at least $25,000 worth of my belongings. But as I sat there in the darkness, looking out at the empty lot where a homeless child was trying to survive because of this woman's greed, I realized the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was this betrayal. The systematic way she had wormed her way into my family, gained my trust, and then used that trust to destroy me. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. But tonight, I finally understood the full scope of what I was up against. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house, every footstep in the hallway made me wonder if Ara was moving more of my belongings while I lay there helpless. By morning, I'd made a decision that terrified and liberated me in equal measure. I was going to pretend to take the medication. At breakfast, I accepted the coffee offered with a grateful smile. Thank you, dear. I think I was being silly about my stomach yesterday. Her face brightened with what looked like genuine relief. I'm so glad you're feeling better. I was worried when you wouldn't eat the soup I made. I took a sip of the coffee, letting the bitter liquid touch my tongue before discreetly spitting it back into the cup when she turned away. The taste was definitely off a metallic undertone that hadn't been there in my coffee before all of this started. Much better, I said, setting the cup down. I think I might take a nap after Marcus leaves for work. I'm still catching up on sleep from that surgery. That's perfect, said, and I caught something eager in her voice. Rest is exactly what you need. After Marcus left, I went upstairs to my bedroom and waited. Within 30 minutes, I heard on the phone downstairs, her voice animated and excited. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. Yes, she took the full dose this morning. No, she's getting much more compliant. The confusion is setting in beautifully. I'd say we can move to phase 2 by next week. My hands gripped the banister as I heard footsteps moving around downstairs. The sounds were coming from my living room, and they weren't normal household noises. They were the sounds of someone moving furniture, opening drawers, going through my things. I went back to my bedroom and lay down on the bed, forcing my breathing to be slow and deep. When I heard footsteps on the stairs, I closed my eyes and let my mouth fall slightly open, mimicking the deep sleep that the medication should have induced. My bedroom door opened quietly. I felt standing there for several long moments, probably making sure I was truly unconscious. Then I heard her moving around my room. Through barely opened eyelids, I watched her go through my dresser drawers with practiced efficiency. She pulled out my jewelry box and removed several more pieces. A gold bracelet that had been my grandmother's, a pair of sapphire earrings I'd bought to celebrate my first successful surgery. But then she did something that made my blood freeze. She opened the drawer where I kept my important documents and pulled out my medical records folder. She flipped through the pages, removing several, and replaced them with different papers. After she left, I waited another 20 minutes before getting up. The documents she'd left were medical evaluations I'd never seen before, all bearing my name and signed by doctors I'd never met. According to these reports, I was showing significant signs of dementia, confusion, and paranoid behavior. One report recommended immediate evaluation for inpatient psychiatric care. The real medical records, the ones that showed I was in perfect mental health, were gone. I sat on my bed staring at these fabricated documents and realized how thoroughly she had planned this. She wasn't just stealing my belongings. She was systematically building a case for having me declared incompetent. And she'd been doing it for months. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Red truck here now. Taking more stuff." Riley was watching out for me. I looked out my bedroom window and saw a red pickup truck parked in my driveway just as she'd described. Two men were loading my antique dining room chairs, the ones that had been in my family for 3 generations. I watched them work with cold efficiency while stood in my driveway counting money. She was selling my family heirlooms like they were garage sale items. That afternoon, I drove to the public library and used their computer to research his background. What I found made me sick to my stomach. All Davies, her maiden name, had been married twice before Marcus. Her first husband, an elderly widower named Robert Chen, had died suddenly of a heart attack just 18 months after their marriage. He'd left her everything in his will, a will that had been changed just weeks before his death. Her second husband was a successful businessman named Frank Morrison. He'd been found dead in his home from what appeared to be an accidental overdose of his heart medication combined with alcohol. Again, she'd inherited everything, and again, the will had been recently modified. There were newspaper obituaries for both men, and in each one was described as a devoted wife who was heartbroken by her husband's sudden death. Marcus was husband number 3. I printed everything I could find and drove home with shaking hands. When I walked into my house, I found in the kitchen humming while she prepared dinner. She looked up with that bright, false smile. "How was your nap?" "You were sleeping so deeply when I checked on you." "Very refreshing," I managed to say. "I feel much clearer now." That was the truth. I felt clearer than I had in months. Crystal clear about what kind of monster had married my son. That evening at dinner, I watched Marcus and interact with new eyes. She was subtle, but controlling, constantly touching his arm when she wanted his attention, deflecting any topic that might lead to questions about her past or their finances. "Marcus," I said during a lull in conversation, "I've been thinking about updating my will. It's been several years since I looked at it." Ara's fork paused halfway to her mouth, but she recovered quickly. "What a practical idea. We should help you with that, shouldn't we, honey?" "Actually," Marcus said, "Ara and I have been talking about that too. Given your recent memory issues, maybe we should make sure all your legal documents are in order." "What memory issues?" I asked calmly. Mom Marcus's voice was patient but concerned. "You've been forgetting things, asking about items that aren't there, getting confused about conversations you've had. Ara's been keeping track because she's worried about you." "She's been keeping track." I made some notes, said modestly. "Just little things I noticed in case we needed to discuss them with a doctor. I show them to Marcus so he knows what to watch for when he's with you." So she was documenting everything, building her case piece by piece. Every interaction, every conversation was being twisted into evidence of my mental decline. "Could I see these notes?" I asked. All's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, but I don't want to upset you. Some of the incidents might be difficult to read about." "I think I can handle it." She went to her purse and pulled out a small notebook. As she handed it to me, I saw the calculation in her eyes. She wanted me to read it. She wanted me to see how hopeless my situation had become. The notebook contained 3 months of detailed entries. According to Arara, I had forgotten entire conversations, repeated the same questions multiple times, and shown increasing paranoia about people taking my things. She documented every time I'd seemed confused, every instance where I'd supposedly mixed up facts or forgotten important information. It was a masterpiece of manipulation mixed in with obvious lies were just enough real incidents. Times when I'd been tired after a long surgery or distracted by work stress to make the overall picture believable. "This is very thorough," I said, handing the notebook back. "I just want to make sure you get the help you need," Alurara said, her voice full of fake compassion. After dinner, I excused myself early again. In my bedroom, I called the nursing home where Riley's grandmother was supposed to be living. After being transferred several times, I finally spoke to someone in administration. "I'm calling about Ruth Henderson," I said. "I believe she was admitted several months ago. Let me check our records. I'm sorry, but we have no patient by that name." "Are you sure you have the right facility?" I tried 3 more nursing homes in the surrounding area. None of them had any record of Ruth Henderson. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Ruth Henderson wasn't in a nursing home. Something much worse had happened to her, and Riley was alone because of it. I sat on my bed surrounded by forged medical records, fake medication, and the growing realization that I was living with a woman who might have killed at least 3 people. My phone buzzed with another text from Riley. "Pretty lady on phone again, talking about doctors and papers, says soon." Soon. Whatever was planning, she was accelerating the timeline. I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror. 64 years old, a successful surgeon. A woman who had spent her life saving other people's lives. And now I was trapped in my own home by someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, I realized something that gave me strength. Ara had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that just because I was older, just because I trusted easily, I would be helpless once I figured out her game. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The next morning, I knew time was running out. Ara's phone conversations were becoming more frequent and urgent, and I'd overheard her making an appointment with Dr. Peterson, the same doctor whose name was on those forged medical records. I had to act fast, but I also had to be smart. One wrong move and I'd find myself locked away in a psychiatric facility just like she'd planned. I pretended to drink the drugged coffee again, making sure to spit most of it back into the cup when Alara wasn't looking. Then I went upstairs and waited for her to check on me. When I heard her footsteps in the hallway, I arranged myself on the bed and closed my eyes, breathing deeply as if heavily sedated. She entered my room and moved around quietly. But this time, she wasn't just taking jewelry. I heard her opening my desk drawers, rustling through papers. When she left, I waited 10 minutes before investigating. My heart nearly stopped when I saw what she'd left behind. Sitting on my desk was a handwritten suicide note, supposedly written by me. I can't bear the confusion anymore. It read in handwriting that looked remarkably like mine. "The memory loss is getting worse every day, and I don't want to be a burden to my family. I've lived a good life, and it's time to let go. Please don't blame yourselves. This is my choice. I love you both." My hands shook as I held the paper. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. Ara was planning to kill me and make it look like suicide. I photographed the note with my phone, then carefully put it back exactly where she'd left it. Then I called the one person I could trust. "Riley, I need your help. Can you meet me at the library in an hour?" When I arrived at the library, I found Riley waiting by the children's section, looking small and lost among the bright picture books. My heart ached seeing her there. This brave child who should have been in school instead of helping me solve a murder plot. "I found out what happened to your grandmother," I told her gently. Riley's eyes widened. "Is she okay? Can I see her?" I knelt down so we were at eye level. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I think your grandmother is gone. I think the pretty lady he hurt her. Riley's face crumpled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded as if she'd already suspected this truth but hadn't wanted to face it. I need to ask you to do something very important, I continued. Something that might help make sure the pretty lady can't hurt anyone else, but it could be dangerous. What do you need me to do? I need you to hide in the house tonight and watch what happens, and I need you to record it if you can. I handed her a small digital recorder I'd bought on the way to the library. Can you work this? Riley examined the device with the quick intelligence of a child who'd learned to be resourceful. Push this button to record, this one to stop. That's right. But Riley, if anything goes wrong, if you think you're in danger, you run. Promise me. I promise. That evening, I made a show of being extra tired and confused at dinner. I asked Marcus the same question twice, forgot what I was saying mid-sentence, and complained about feeling dizzy. Maybe you should go to bed early, Mom, Marcus suggested, his voice full of concern. That's probably a good idea, I agreed. I just feel so foggy lately. Ara's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. I'll bring you some warm milk to help you sleep. In my bedroom, I arranged pillows under my blankets to look like a sleeping body, then hid in my walk-in closet with the door cracked open just enough to see the room. I'd left a window slightly open for Riley to climb through after everyone was asleep. Around 11. Daji. Ara entered my room carrying a glass of what looked like milk. She approached the bed, then stopped when she realized the lumps under the blanket weren't moving with the rhythm of breathing. Clever old woman, she muttered, pulling back the covers to reveal the pillows. That's when I heard the soft scraping sound of someone climbing through the window. Riley had made it inside. Ara spun around at the sound, and I saw her face clearly in the moonlight streaming through the window. Gone was any pretense of the caring daughter-in-law. Her expression was cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy. Well, well, she said, advancing toward where Riley crouched by the window. What do we have here? Another little spy. Riley scrambled backward but was faster. She grabbed the child's arm roughly. You're the little rat who's been watching the house, aren't you? Just like you watched when I dealt with your pathetic grandmother. Let me go. Riley struggled against Alara's grip. You know too much, little girl. Just like your grandmother knew too much when she started asking questions about where her jewelry went. I pressed the record button on my phone, capturing every word. She fought me at the end. Ara continued, her voice conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. Stronger than I expected for such an old woman. But the pills I'd been giving her for months made her weak, confused. No one questioned it when I said she'd wandered off and fallen into the creek. Riley's eyes were wide with terror, but she was still fighting. You killed her. I solved a problem. All corrected. Just like I solved problems with my other husbands. Men are so trusting when they think they've found a beautiful young wife who loves them. A little digitalis in their evening brandy and heart attacks are so believable in older men. She was confessing to everything and I was recording every word. And now I have to solve the problem of you and that meddling old doctor. Ara continued. She's been much harder to handle than I expected. Stronger will than most old women, but everyone will understand when they find her suicide note and her body. The poor, confused woman couldn't handle losing her mind. But first, I need to deal with you. Ara reached into her pocket and pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. This will be quick, little girl. Much more merciful than what I had planned for the doctor. That's when I stepped out of the closet. Let her go, Ara. She spun around the syringe still in her hand. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw the pure evil underneath. You're supposed to be unconscious, she hissed. I stopped drinking your coffee 3 days ago. I know about the fake medical records, the forged power of attorney, the suicide note you planted. I know about your other husbands, and I know what you did to Ruth Henderson. R's grip on Riley loosened slightly, and the smart child immediately pulled away and ran to stand behind me. You have no proof of anything, Ara said. but her voice had lost its confidence. Actually, I do. I held up my phone. I've been recording this entire conversation. Your confession to 3 murders, your admission of drugging me, and your threat to kill a child for the first time since I'd known her. All looked genuinely afraid. Marcus will never believe you, she said desperately. He thinks you're losing your mind. I've spent months building that story. Maybe, but the police will believe the recording and they'll believe the evidence I've gathered about your previous husbands. Did you really think no one would eventually connect the dots between 3 sudden deaths and convenient inheritance? Ara's hand tightened on the syringe. You stupid old woman. Do you think you've won? I'll tell them you attacked me, that you've become violent and delusional. Who do you think they'll believe, a confused old woman or a grieving young widow? They'll believe the truth, a new voice said from the doorway. We all turned to see Marcus standing there, his face white with shock. He'd heard enough to understand what his wife really was. Marcus, Ara said, her voice immediately shifting back to its sweet, manipulative tone. Thank God you're here. Your mother has become violent. She's threatening me with some kind of recording device, and she's got this child helping her. I think she's having a complete psychotic break. But Marcus wasn't looking at her with love or concern anymore. He was looking at her with horror and disgust. I heard what you said about your other husbands, he said quietly. I heard you confess to murdering an old woman and planning to kill my mother. That's not what you heard, Ara insisted. But her voice was getting shriller. She's confused you just like she's confused herself. I would never hurt anyone. The syringe in your hand suggests otherwise, Marcus said. Ara looked down at the syringe as if she'd forgotten she was holding it. Then in one swift motion she lunged toward me, but Riley was faster. The brave little girl stuck her foot out, sending tumbling to the floor. The syringe skittered across the hardwood, coming to rest under my dresser. Marcus immediately knelt down and pinned Ara's arms behind her back while I called 911. As we waited for the police to arrive, Ara alternated between tearful pleas for forgiveness and cold threats about what she would do to all of us when she got out of this situation. But she wouldn't be getting out of this situation. Not with the recording, not with the evidence I'd gathered about her previous crimes, and not with Marcus as a witness to her final confession. Riley sat beside me on the bed, small and shaking but brave. Is it over? She whispered. I put my arm around her shoulders. This remarkable child who had risked everything to save a stranger. Yes, sweetheart, it's over. But even as I said the words, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. Because now Marcus would have to face the truth about the woman he'd loved and trusted, and I would have to help us both heal from the betrayal that had nearly destroyed our family. 6 months later, I was in my kitchen making breakfast when I heard small footsteps running down the stairs. Riley appeared in the doorway, her dark hair neatly braided and her school uniform perfectly pressed. Good morning, Grandma Bessie, she said, using the name she'd started calling me after the adoption papers were finalized. Good morning, sweetheart. Ready for your spelling test today? She nodded confidently. I studied all the words twice, and Marcus helped me with the hard ones last night. It still amazed me how naturally she'd adapted to having a real family to being a child instead of a survivor. The first few weeks had been difficult. She'd hoarded food in her room, jumped at unexpected sounds, and had nightmares about. But with patience, love, and some gentle counseling, she was healing. Marcus walked into the kitchen adjusting his tie. He looked older than his 38 years. The betrayal had aged him, but there was peace in his eyes that hadn't been there when he was married to Alara. Morning, Mom. Morning, Riley Bear. He ruffled her hair affectionately. Don't forget, I'm picking you up after school for your dentist appointment. I won't forget, Riley promised, then looked up at him with the serious expression she sometimes got when she was thinking about something important. Marcus, are you sad that the bad lady is in prison? Marcus sat down at the kitchen table and considered her question carefully. We'd learned to always be honest with Riley within reason. She'd seen too much deception in her young life. I'm sad that I didn't see who she really was, he said finally. I'm sad that she hurt people, including your grandmother Ruth. But I'm not sad that she can't hurt anyone anymore. Riley nodded solemnly. I'm glad she can't hurt anyone either. And I'm glad I have you and Grandma Bessie now. After they left for the day, Marcus to his job at the engineering firm, Riley to her new school where she was thriving despite starting late in the year. I sat in my living room with my morning coffee and thought about how much had changed. The house felt different now, lighter somehow despite the terrible things that had happened here. We'd redecorated Riley's room together, painting it lavender and filling it with books and art supplies. The dining room had new chairs to replace the antique ones had sold. And gradually I was replacing the other items she'd stolen, but the real changes weren't in the furniture or decor. The real changes were in us. Marcus and I had grown closer than we'd been since he was a child. The crisis had stripped away years of polite distance and forced us to really see each other. He'd apologized countless times for not believing me, for letting manipulate him, for almost losing me to her schemes. She was so convincing, he'd said one evening as we sat on the porch watching Riley play in the backyard. Every concern she raised about your health seemed so reasonable, so caring. I thought I was being a good son by listening to her. You were being a loving husband, I'd replied. That's not your fault. She was a professional manipulator, Marcus. She'd had years of practice. The trial had been difficult but cathartic. Ara had maintained her innocence at first, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy between a senile old woman and a disturbed child. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recording of her confession, the forged documents, the pattern of behavior with her previous husbands. When they'd exhumed the bodies of her first two husbands and found traces of digitalis in their remains, her lawyer had finally convinced her to accept a plea deal. She'd received life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 murders and multiple counts of fraud and attempted murder. I'd attended every day of the trial not out of revenge, but because I needed to see justice done. Riley had been too young to testify, but her witness statement had been crucial in establishing the timeline of events. The most satisfying moment had been when they'd found Ruth Henderson's body in the creek behind her old house, exactly where Alar had said she'd hidden it. Riley had finally been able to lay her grandmother to rest properly, and we'd held a beautiful memorial service in the cemetery, where Ruth now rested next to her husband of 60 years. A soft knock at my front door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, holding a covered casserole dish. I made too much lasagna last night, she said with the smile that told me she'd made it specifically for us. Would you and your family like some, Mrs.? Chen had been one of the first people to reach out after the truth about Ara came to light. She'd confessed that Ara had told her I was becoming paranoid and didn't want visitors anymore. Like so many others, she'd been manipulated into staying away from me. We'd love some, I said, accepting the dish gratefully. Would you like to come in for coffee? I'd like that very much. As we sat in my kitchen, Mrs. Chen asked about Riley's adjustment to school and how Marcus was handling everything. These conversations were part of my healing process, reconnecting with the friendships and community ties that had systematically severed. You know, Mrs. Chen said as she prepared to leave, what that woman did was terrible. But in a way, she brought you and Marcus closer together. And you gained a granddaughter who needed you as much as you needed her. She was right. Riley had filled a space in my heart I hadn't even realized was empty. At 64, I'd thought my child-raising days were long behind me. But Riley had brought laughter and energy back into my house along with purpose I hadn't felt in years. That evening, as I helped Riley with her homework at the kitchen table, she looked up at me with those serious dark eyes. Grandma Bessie, do you think my real grandma would be happy that I live with you now? I set down the math worksheet I was checking and took her small hand in mine. I think your Grandma Ruth would be very happy that you're safe and loved. And I think she's proud of how brave you were. I was scared, Riley admitted. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, sweetheart. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Later that night, after Riley was asleep and Marcus had gone to his apartment downtown, he was taking his time moving back home, wanting to make sure Riley felt secure before changing the household dynamic again. I sat in my garden. I'd started growing vegetables again, something I hadn't done since Marcus was small. Riley loved helping me plant seeds and water the seedlings. She'd never seen anything grow from the ground before, and her wonder at the tiny tomato plants pushing through the soil had reminded me of the miracle of new life. As I sat there in the peaceful evening air, surrounded by the sense of growing things and the sound of Riley's gentle breathing from her open bedroom window, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. That woman had been isolated, manipulated, and slowly poisoned both literally and figuratively. She'd been losing herself piece by piece to a predator who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. But that woman had also been stronger than she'd known. When it mattered most, she'd found the courage to fight back, to protect not just herself, but an innocent child who'd needed her help. I was still that strong woman, but I was more than I'd been before. I was Riley's grandmother, Marcus's partner in healing, and a survivor who'd chosen to use her experience to help others. I'd started volunteering at a local organization that helped elderly people avoid financial scams and elder abuse, sharing my story carefully, without traumatizing details, helped other families recognize warning signs they might otherwise miss. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Riley's school called. She got 100% on her spelling test. I'm proud of our girl. Our girl. Not just my adopted granddaughter or his ward, but our girl, our family. I looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky and felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel. Complete peace. Ara had tried to steal my life, my sanity, and ultimately my very existence. She'd come closer to succeeding than I cared to think about. But in the end, her evil had brought unexpected gifts. A deeper relationship with my son. A granddaughter who lit up every day with her resilience and joy, and a renewed sense of my own strength. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood relations or legal documents. Sometimes family is a brave little girl who risks everything to warn a stranger about danger. Sometimes it's neighbors who bring casseroles and renewed friendships. Sometimes it's choosing to trust again after betrayal nearly destroyed you. As I walked back into my house, our house, I paused in Riley's doorway. She was sleeping peacefully, her hand curled around the small stuffed rabbit Marcus had bought her on her first day of school. In the soft glow of her nightlight, she looked like any normal child, safe and loved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and small victories. Riley had a book report due. Marcus was coming for dinner, and I had an appointment with a new patient who needed surgery. Life would continue in all its beautiful, ordinary complexity. But tonight, as I turned off the lights and headed to my own bedroom, I felt the deep satisfaction of a woman who had faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged not just intact, but transformed. I'd been tested in ways I'd never imagined, and I discovered reserves of strength and love I'd never known I possessed. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of something even better. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.